Alright, here we are again in Blender, and I'm going to continue with making a cubic object. So if you recall from the last time, I had added a cube to the scene, and I had moved it so that it was sitting on the virtual floor. And I pointed out that this view here with the cube in the middle, and it's a 1 by 1 cube, in the center of the scene, on the floor, is where cubic objects live. If it was just a cube, the object was just a cube, this would be the correct size and position for it before exporting. In Blender, if you want to navigate, you can move around things by using the middle mouse button. So there's your rotation. If you want to focus on a particular object that you're going to rotate around, once it's selected, and you can tell it's selected because it's got this highlight around it, you hit the dot key on your numeric keypad and that'll focus on that object, and now when you rotate, you're rotating around that object. So if you had several objects, that'd be more useful, but in this case we just have this one cube. The middle mouse button is used for all navigation in Blender, so you just have to remember that. If you want to look around the scene, it's always middle mouse button. If you hold the middle mouse button and the shift key at the same time, it turns into a panning button. And if you hold the middle mouse button and control key, it'll zoom in and out. You can also zoom in and out using the mouse wheel. Another thing to note is that you can change the way that every view is displayed. So right now we're in a perspective view, but if I hit the number 5 on the numeric keypad, I get this different sort of 3D perspective view where the grids in the distance, you'll notice that they're the same size as the grids in the foreground. Whereas if I switch to true perspective, these are smaller in the distance and these are larger. So this is normally how you see things. If I switch into this orthogonal view by hitting the number 5, it kind of looks like old 2D games where they used to draw blocks like this in 2D and then tile them to make a fake 3D game. So it's not so useful when you're in perspective view, but if you switch to, say, the top view, and you want to see like sort of more like a blueprint of what's happening, and so you switch to orthogonal for that, and then now you can see exactly like the block starts at -0.5 and it ends at 0.5, and if you wanted to move it half a block over, you could go exactly to this grid here. So it allows you to do things like you're working on a blueprint or a schematic, and here from the side view it's the same thing. Whereas if I switch to the true perspective, you just get a different kind of side view, and it's not useful for measuring. So if you want to measure things and see specifically what you're doing, this orthogonal side view is pretty useful. To get back to perspective, you can just rotate back out. Up here on the top right, you have the list of all the objects in your scene. We just have a cube, but we also have a camera. We're looking through the camera right now, and we have a lamp. The lamp provides light to the scene. It's not going to be used in the game or the output from Blender, but it's useful for just sort of previewing things while we're in Blender, so we just leave it. So going back to the cube, the other thing that you have to understand about Blender is that when you select an object, if you want to change the way that object looks, if you want to edit the object, if you want to turn a cube into a chair or a cube into a table or whatever it is that you're making, you have to switch to edit mode. There's two ways to switch to edit mode. One is to use the hotkey, the tab key. Now I'm in edit mode, now I'm not. The other way is to come down here and just select edit mode from the mode menu. But tab's quicker, I think most people just hit tab. Alright, so if we want to make an object, let's say we're going to make a Halloween object, and in this case a simple coffin. One thing to understand as well about exporting to cubic is the cube is fine for a 1 by 1 block. If this was just a block, it would be sort of exactly here. But in some cases you have objects that are twice as high or twice as long. And in the case of objects that are twice as long, like the workbench is an example, that's a 2 by 1 object. You extend along the x-axis, this red line here, in the positive direction. So the extra modeling will go over here. in this area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch into edit mode, and I'm going to go to the side view, and actually I'm going to grab this. I'm going to switch here to faces. There's a button here to switch to faces. And what I'm going to do from the side view, I'm going to drag this down so that it's about half a block high. And if I zoom in a bit, I can actually grab this bottom face and drag that so that it's just flush with the floor. Okay. So now we've got a half block height. And I think that's better for a coffin, because I think if it was as high as a full block, it would be too thick. I think a coffin should be a little bit longer than a normal block. So I'm going to bring it across here until it reaches 2 blocks across. So it's like a workbench, but half height. The feeding trough is like this, 2x1, half height. If you want to select, you can just sort of click on these dots when you're in a mode. If you switch to edge mode, you can click on the edges and select them. If you hit the letter A, it will unselect everything that you've selected. If nothing is selected and you hit the letter A, it will select everything. So it sort of toggles. But if you select just some things and you hit A, then it'll unselect them all. You can select more than one face by holding down Shift and selecting more, and it will add to the selection. I'm using the left mouse button to select. The default in Blender is the right mouse button, but you can change it in the user preferences. I changed it because I think most programs use the left mouse button. It just feels more natural to me, so I switched it. But if you just install Blender and you're just using it and you haven't changed any settings, just be informed that the right mouse button is actually going to select, I think. Alright, so for a coffin, if we look at it from the top, usually the head is a little bit thinner, and then there's a wide area where the shoulders go around here, and then the legs, so the foot area is a bit thinner as well. So in order to actually make changes to this geometry, I mean, we can change it right now. We can grab this edge here and move it, and now we've got a different shape. But usually what we're going to need to do is add more detail to this object. So one way to add more detail to objects in Blender is to use loop slicing. So to do that, you hit Control R, and now you'll notice that when I hover my mouse over the object here, there's a highlight, in this case a magenta highlight, going through the box. If I hover it near this edge, it'll go through the other way. So it turns out that this is the kind of cut that I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here, I'm going to click it. Now I can move this cut before I'm done. And what I want to do is I want to put it up near where I think the shoulders would be, so around here. And I'll hit A to unselect everything. So now I have enough detail to start getting the shape that I want. So I'll go back to the face selection mode. I'll grab a face here. And what I want to do is I want to scale this face down so it's a little bit smaller near the head. So if I hit S to scale and I drag my mouse towards the center, you'll notice that it starts scaling down. But we have a problem here, which is that we're starting to get this sort of a bullet shape, and that's not really what we want. We actually want it to only scale in this y-axis. We don't want this, because normally by default it will scale in all directions. So the top gets scaled down, and the down part gets scaled up, and this side gets scaled in. So everything gets scaled in. So we don't want this. So I'm going to undo it. Control Z to undo. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit S again to scale, but this time I'm going to follow it up with a second key, and the second key is Y. So what does that do? That says constrain what you're doing in the Y-axis. So you hit S for scale, and then you follow it up with the direction. You can do X for X direction, Y, or Z. So in this case, I know it's Y because I can see that from the green line. So now when I scale, it's only going to scale in this axis that I want. So I just bring it in until it looks about right, and hit A to unselect everything, and now we've got the head part. So now I'll come over, I'll grab the face at the foot area, and I'm going to switch to a top view. And I'm going to scale in Y again until it looks about right. So now we've got our basic shape. Now, at the coffin here would be like sort of right on the edges of the blocks, and what I want to do is just scale the whole thing in just a little bit, so it's just sitting slightly inside the blocks. So I'm going to grab all of the faces. I'm going to hit S. And now what I want to do is I don't want it scaling up and down. I just want it scaling in the X and Y directions. So if I hit Z, it would scale only up and down. But if I hit Shift Z, it constrains it to only everything but Z, basically. So now I move it in. And I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to grab this guy. I'm going to bring him up closer to the edge of the block here. Same with this one. Okay, we can look from the top again. And you can see we got a pretty good coffin shape here. So now, I just want to add a little bit more detail, make it a little bit more interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all of the edges along the top here. And I'm going to use a very common operation in 3D, which is called beveling. To bevel the edges, you hit Control B. And now as I bring this out, it will add a bevel. So that's going to be kind of our lid. Now if I look at it from the side again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this lid just a little bit over the half block height, which means that if a QB is walking on it, their feet will sink slightly into the coffin, but it won't be too noticeable because of the size of the blocks and the size of the QB relative to the whole screen. So it just gives a slightly better shape to the coffin, I think. And well, I mean, I don't really know. When I come in here and I start modeling, it may be that this is not the right size or not the right shape, and that it'll look weird in the game. I'm not really 100% certain that this is the right shape, but I just sort of go with my gut, and then I'll put it in the game, and if it's wrong, I might have to come back and remodel it and adjust it and tweak it. It's not uncommon that I do that. What I'm going to do to make this a little more shapely and interesting as well is I'm going to grab these bottom edges here, and I'm also going to scale those in a little bit, just give it a little shape. And I'm going to go to the bottom and I'm going to remove these two faces here. You can hit X to delete. So now the bottom is gone, and I explained in the last video why I do that. Alright, so I think that is good enough for a simple model for a coffin, for the most simple kind of coffin, like basically a box made out of wood. So the next step will be to add UVs to this object so we can start to texture it. And I'll do that in the next video.